We had 16 years, a golden retriever, and a rhythm I thought was unbreakable. Then a single notification on our shared iPad shattered everything. 16 years. That's how long we'd been together. 16 years of inside jokes, shared holidays, and the comfortable silence that only comes from knowing someone better than you know yourself. We were Mark and I, a single entity, the couple everyone pointed to and said, "That's what I want." We had the house with the slightly crooked porch swing, the golden retriever who was more fluff than dog, and 1,000 tiny rituals that stitched our lives together. Every morning I'd wake up to the smell of the coffee he'd started for me. Every night he'd fall asleep with his hand resting on the small of my back. It was our rhythm, the steady, reliable beat of our life, and I thought it was unbreakable. The crack in our foundation didn't come from a dramatic fight or a whispered confession. It came from a notification on the family iPad, the one we kept on the kitchen counter for recipes and shared calendars. I was looking up a recipe for lasagna, humming to myself, when a banner popped up at the top of the screen. A message from a name I didn't recognize. Chloe. It said, "Can't wait for our weekend, just like you promised. I've booked the cutest little cabin, no distractions this time." My blood went cold. It was a cold that started in my fingertips and spread through my veins until it reached my heart, squeezing it into a tight, icy knot. My first thought was, it's a mistake, a wrong number. Mark's phone was linked to the iPad, a convenience we'd set up years ago and forgotten about, but the name, Chloe, it sounded young, bubbly. Everything I felt I wasn't anymore at 41. I tapped on the notification, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped the heavy tablet. It opened their message history. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just one message. It was weeks of them, months. They were filled with heart emojis, photos I couldn't bring myself to open, and talk of a future. Their future. He told her he loved the way she laughed. He told her she made him feel young again. He told her he was working through a complicated separation and that he just needed a little more time to be completely free. A complicated separation. I looked around my kitchen, at the photo of us on the fridge from our trip to Italy last year, at his muddy work boots by the back door, at the half-finished crossword he'd left on the table that morning. Complicated didn't seem to be the right word. Non-existent was more like it. For the next 2 days, I lived in a fog. I went through the motions. I made coffee. I walked the dog. I smiled and kissed Mark when he came home from work, the taste of his betrayal like ash on my tongue. He didn't notice a thing. He just saw his loving wife, the comfortable bedrock of his life, completely oblivious while he was out building a new one. But while I was smiling, I was also digging. At night, after he'd fallen asleep with his hand in its usual place on my back, a touch that now felt like a brand, I would slip out of bed and become a detective in my own home. I learned that Chloe was 28. She was a graphic designer with a bright, toothy smile and a love for hiking, something Mark had always complained was boring when I suggested it. Her social media was public, a rookie mistake. Her feed was a highlight reel of the life he was living without me. There were pictures of them at a wine tasting event he'd told me was a mandatory work conference. A shot of his hands. I knew his hands, the scar on his left thumb, holding a bouquet of peonies with the caption, "He just gets me." And then there was the post that made my plan crystallize. It was a picture of her, looking blissfully happy with a caption that read, "So incredibly lucky to have found a man who is honest, kind, and all mine. After everything he's been through with his awful ex, he deserves all the happiness in the world." His awful ex. That was me. The woman who had supported him through his failed business venture, nursed him through pneumonia, and held his hand at his father's funeral. The woman who was, by the way, still very much his wife. Reading that, something inside me shifted. The grief and the shock hardened into a cold, sharp-edged resolve. She didn't know. He had painted me as a monster, a dragon from his past that he had bravely escaped, all while he was still sleeping in my bed. She was a victim in this too, in a way, a pawn in his disgusting game. And I realized a screaming match with him wouldn't fix anything. It would just give him the satisfaction of a fight. He'd twist my words, call me crazy, and run straight into her sympathetic arms. No, he didn't deserve a fight. He deserved exposure. They both deserved the truth. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I didn't have to look for the link. I knew it by heart. It was the online gallery our wedding photographer had made for us. 150 curated images of the happiest day of my life. The day he'd stood before 100 of our friends and family and promised to love and cherish me, and only me, for the rest of his life. I found Chloe's professional contact page online. It listed an email for work inquiries. Perfect. Anonymous. I drafted a new email. The subject line was simple. Thought you should see this. In the body, I didn't write a single word. I just pasted the link. My cursor blinked over the blue, underlined hyperlink. It was a digital guillotine, ready to sever two lives he had so carefully braided together. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I took a deep, shuddering breath, moved the mouse, and with a click that felt as loud as a gunshot, I sent his two worlds hurtling toward each other. The silence that followed the click was absolute. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. I sat there in the pale glow of the monitor, my heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. What had I done? A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't me. I wasn't the kind of woman who orchestrated revenge plots in the dead of night. I was the woman who made lists, who remembered birthdays, who laminated important documents. But the woman staring back at me from the dark screen was someone else entirely, a stranger with cold fire in her veins. I shut the laptop, the soft click sealing the deed, and crept back to bed. Mark murmured in his sleep and rolled over, slinging a heavy arm across my waist. The familiar weight of it felt alien, suffocating. I lay there, rigid as a statue, until the sun began to bleed through the blinds, feeling like a bomb with a lit fuse ticking quietly in my own home. The next day was the longest of my life. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. I found myself obsessively refreshing Chloe's Instagram page, looking for a sign, a deleted photo, a cryptic quote posted to her story. Anything, but there was nothing. Her profile remained a cheerful public shrine to their stolen moments. The picture of his hands holding the peonies was still there, mocking me. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe the email went to her spam folder. Maybe she saw the sender was anonymous and deleted it without a second thought. Maybe my grand, life-altering gesture had been as effective as throwing a pebble into the ocean. The thought was deflating, leaving me feeling not powerful but foolish. Mark came home that evening in a great mood. He'd brought me a bouquet of daisies. Just because, he said, kissing my cheek. The hypocrisy was so blatant, so breathtakingly audacious, it almost made me laugh. Daisies. He brought his wife daisies while his girlfriend was posting pictures of the peonies he'd bought her. I arranged them in a vase, my movements stiff and robotic. "They're beautiful," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. He wrapped his arms around me from behind as I stood at the sink, resting his chin on my shoulder. "I was thinking," he murmured into my hair, "we should plan a real vacation. Just the two of us. Go back to that little spot in Tuscany. What do you think?" He was planning a future with me while actively building another one with someone else. The sheer nerve of it reignited the cold fire inside me. I leaned back into his embrace, a loving wife. "I'd love that," I whispered. 2 more days passed. The silence from Chloe's end was deafening. My hope had curdled into a sour mix of anxiety and disappointment. I had started to accept that my plan had failed. It was Friday night. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, the rhythmic thud of the knife on the cutting board a calming distraction. Mark was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone and telling me about a ridiculous argument he'd had with his boss. It was so normal, so achingly familiar that for a split second, I could almost forget everything. I could almost believe we were just Mark and I, the couple with the crooked porch swing, about to have a quiet Friday night dinner. Then it started. His phone, resting face up on the granite countertop beside him, buzzed. A text message. He glanced at it and his brow furrowed slightly. Before he could respond, it buzzed again, and again, and again. A rapid, frantic succession of notifications, one after another, lighting up the screen. It was like a digital onslaught. "What the hell?" he muttered, picking up the phone. I kept chopping, my eyes fixed on the carrots in front of me, but my entire body was a tightly coiled spring. I watched his face in my peripheral vision. I saw his thumb swipe to unlock the screen. I saw his eyes scan the messages, and I saw the color drain from his face, leaving it a sickly, waxy white. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He slowly lifted his head, his eyes wide and panicked, searching for something, an explanation, an escape. And then his phone began to ring. The cheerful, upbeat ringtone he'd chosen shattered the quiet tension in the kitchen, loud and jarring. He flinched, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. The name displayed on it was Chloe. He jabbed a finger at the screen, silencing the call, his breath coming in short, ragged puffs. But a second later, it started ringing again, insistent, desperate. He silenced it once more, his hand trembling. He didn't look at the phone. He looked at me. His eyes, full of dawning terror and pure, undiluted panic, locked with mine across the kitchen island. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew this was my doing. And I didn't look away. I just met his gaze, my expression perfectly, terrifyingly calm, as the phone on the counter between us began to ring for a third time. The thud of my knife against the cutting board was the only sound for a long, stretched-out moment. The phone on the counter continued its shrill, desperate ringing. Mark's eyes were locked on mine, wide with a trapped animal's panic. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked from me to the phone and back again, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. Finally, the ringing stopped, plunging the room back into a heavy, suffocating silence. He licked his lips, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a pathetic sheen of sweat on his forehead. It's a work thing," he stammered, the lie so flimsy it was insulting. "A client who's having a meltdown." I didn't say anything. I just placed my knife down deliberately next to the pile of neatly diced carrots. I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, my movements slow and measured. The phone lit up again, a string of new messages, one after another. I could see the first few words of the preview on the screen. "Mark, answer me." "Whose wedding is that? You told me you were divorced." "An awful ex," I said softly, my voice devoid of all emotion. "That's what you called me, isn't it?" His face went slack. The last shred of denial fell away, leaving behind the ugly, raw truth. "How?" he breathed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "How did you—" "You should be more careful what you link to the family iPad, Mark," I said, still in that same eerily calm tone. "It's convenient until it's not." Before he could process it, before he could formulate another lie or pathetic excuse, the phone started ringing again. Chloe was persistent. I'd give her that. This time, I didn't wait. In one swift movement, I leaned across the island, snatched the phone from the counter, and swiped to answer. Mark lunged for it, a strangled "no" escaping his lips, but he was too late. I hit the speakerphone button, the electronic chirp sealing his fate. I held the phone flat in my palm on the granite countertop, a centerpiece for the final, ruinous act of our marriage. A frantic, tearful voice flooded the kitchen. "Mark? Oh my God, finally! What is going on? I got this email, this link. It's a wedding album. It's your wedding album. Who is that woman, the one in the white dress? The one you're kissing? You told me you were divorced. You told me she was a nightmare who left you years ago. Is this a joke?" Her voice cracked on the last word, a sob catching in her throat. I watched Mark. He stood frozen, his face a mask of horror. He looked at the phone, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. He was completely and utterly exposed, his two carefully separated worlds colliding in the most brutal way imaginable. The voice on the phone, the voice of the woman he'd whispered promises to, was now a witness to my existence, and I, the awful ex, was a witness to his destruction. "Chloe," I said, my voice clear and steady. "His name is Mark, and I'm his wife." A sharp gasp came from the speaker, followed by a choked silence. Mark flinched as if I'd physically struck him. He stared at me, his eyes pleading now. Pleading for what? For me to stop? To rewind time? To help him clean up the mess he had so meticulously made? The silence stretched on, thick with the poison of his lies. Finally, the call ended. Chloe had hung up. I looked down at the phone in my hand, then back at him. "I think," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as the knife on the cutting board, "you should pack a bag." He just stood there, speechless, broken. "Now, Mark." He didn't move. It seemed the command was too complex for his shattered brain to process. So I sighed, a small, tired sound, and walked past him out of the kitchen. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my bedroom, and pulled one of his weekend bags from the top of the closet. I didn't pack his favorite things. I packed 3 t-shirts from the bottom of the drawer, a pair of jeans with a hole in the knee, a few pairs of mismatched socks, and the travel-sized toiletries from the back of the linen closet. It took me less than 5 minutes. When I came back downstairs, he was still standing in the same spot in the kitchen, a ghost at the scene of his own haunting. I dropped the bag on the floor by the front door. The dull thud was a sound of finality. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a pathetic cocktail of self-pity and fear. "Where am I supposed to go?" he whispered. "Honestly, Mark?" I said, walking back to the kitchen island and picking up his phone. "I couldn't care less." I held the phone out to him. He took it from me, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. The touch sent a jolt of revulsion through me. He picked up his bag and walked to the door, not looking back. He opened it, stepped out into the night, and closed it quietly behind him. I stood alone in the sudden, echoing silence of the house. It was over. Just like that. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 3 days. My legs felt weak, and I gripped the edge of the counter for support. My eyes fell upon his phone, which I had somehow ended up holding again after he'd fumbled with his bag. And as I stared at the dark screen, it lit up one last time. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a frantic text. It was a single message from a number I didn't recognize, but a name I now knew all too well. It was from Chloe, and all it said was, "I know you have his phone. This message is for you. I need to talk to you, the real you." I stared at the message, the words glowing ominously in the silent kitchen. "I need to talk to you, the real you." My first instinct was to throw the phone against the wall, to shatter it into 1,000 pieces, and let both of them disappear from my life forever. What could she possibly have to say to me? An apology? An accusation? It didn't matter. She was a part of the wreckage, a name and a face inextricably linked to the worst betrayal of my life. I didn't want to talk to her. I wanted to pour a glass of wine, take a scalding hot shower, and try to forget the sound of her tearful voice echoing in my home. But curiosity, that insidious, nagging little voice, whispered in my ear. She thought she knew him. She thought she knew me. What did she want now that the meticulously crafted illusion had been shattered? My thumbs hovered over the screen. Part of me, the part that was still numb and shell-shocked, wanted to ignore it. But another part, the cold, calculating part that had sent the email, saw an opportunity. Not for revenge, not anymore. That fire had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, empty crater. This was about information. It was about understanding the full scope of the life he'd been living behind my back. Against my better judgment, I typed a reply. "This is she. What do you want?" I hit send before I could change my mind, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared almost instantly. I held my breath. The message that came through was longer than I expected. "First, I am so sorry. I swear to you, I had no idea. He told me he was divorced, that it was years ago, that you were..." He said terrible things. I see now that was all a lie. He showed me a picture once, said it was you, but it must have been a stock photo or something. I'm sitting here looking at your wedding photos and I feel like the biggest fool in the world. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I'm not a monster. I wouldn't have done this if I'd known. The message was a strange mix of self-preservation and genuine remorse. She wasn't a monster. She was just a fool, just like me. I felt a bizarre, unwelcome pang of sympathy for her. He had played us both, casting each of us as the villain in the other's story. "He's a very convincing liar," I typed back, the words tasting like acid. "You have no idea," she replied instantly. "Look, I know this is insane, but can we meet? Just for coffee? There are things you need to know, things I think you deserve to see. He left a bag here a few weeks ago, some of his things. I was going to drop it off for him. Now, I think you should have it. His things. What things? More lies? More evidence of a life I knew nothing about?" The idea was both horrifying and morbidly compelling. Meeting her felt like a terrible idea, like willingly walking back into the fire. But not knowing, letting him control the narrative forever, felt even worse. She was the only other person on the planet who understood exactly what kind of man Mark really was, because she had just discovered it herself. "Fine," I texted back. "Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., the Grind Coffee Shop on Elm Street. Come alone." The next morning, I felt like I was preparing for battle. I chose my outfit carefully, a pair of dark jeans, a simple black sweater, and a leather jacket. I wanted to look strong, put together, not like a woman whose life had just been detonated. When I walked into the coffee shop, I saw her immediately. She was sitting at a small table in the corner, looking exactly like her Instagram photos, only smaller, paler, and infinitely more human. Her bright, bubbly persona was gone, replaced by red-rimmed eyes and a nervous energy that made her continuously fold and unfold her napkin. She looked up as I approached, and a flicker of fear, or maybe recognition, crossed her face. "You're her," she whispered as I sat down, her voice barely audible over the hiss of the espresso machine. "I'm his wife," I corrected her, my voice harder than I intended. Or I was. I didn't offer a smile. I didn't offer my name. "Right, I brought the bag," she said, gesturing to a canvas duffel bag at her feet. It was his gym bag, the one I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. Seeing it in her possession sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. She pushed it slightly with her foot. "It's all in there." "What's all in there?" I asked, my patience already wearing thin. She took a shaky breath and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "He wasn't just lying to you about me. He was lying to both of us about everything. His job, his finances, everything. I started looking into things after I got your email. He told me he was a senior partner at his firm. I called them this morning. They said he was let go 6 months ago for financial misconduct. He told me his parents left him a huge inheritance, and that's how he was paying for our trips, for gifts. But inside that bag, there are stacks of credit card statements. They're all maxed out, and they're not all in his name." She paused, her eyes welling up with tears. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, her gaze steady and full of a terrible certainty. "Some of them are in yours." The clatter of ceramic and the low hum of conversation in the coffee shop faded into a dull roar in my ears. "Some of them are in yours." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was a betrayal of our entire shared existence. Our finances, our future, the security I thought we had built together over 16 years, it was all a lie. He hadn't just been building a new life with her. He had been funding it by destroying mine. The cold resolve I had felt in the kitchen returned, no longer just a desire for exposure, but a primal need for self-preservation. "Thank you," I said to Chloe, my voice a low, tight wire. I stood up, my movements clipped and efficient. I didn't want coffee. I didn't want to talk anymore. I just wanted the bag. She pushed it towards me without a word. I picked it up, the familiar weight of it now feeling sinister, and walked out of the coffee shop without a backward glance. I didn't feel sorry for her anymore. I didn't feel anything for her. She was just a catalyst, the unwitting messenger who had delivered the final devastating blow. This was bigger than a cheating husband now. This was a crime. I drove not home, but to my office. I was a paralegal, and while my field was corporate law, not fraud, I knew enough to know where to start. I locked my office door, dumped the contents of the gym bag onto my desk, and began to piece together the full picture of Mark's deception. It was worse than I could have imagined. There were at least 5 credit cards in my name that I knew nothing about, all with balances that made my stomach churn. He'd clearly been intercepting the mail for months. There were loan application denials, letters from collection agencies addressed to him at a P.O. box, and statements for a storage unit I never knew existed. He hadn't just been fired. He had been systematically liquidating our life together. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, financial advisors, and police reports. I moved with a relentless, detached efficiency. Every phone call, every document I signed was another brick I was laying in the wall between my old life and my new one. I filed for divorce citing adultery and fraud. I filed a police report for identity theft. I froze my credit, changed all my passwords, and put a stop on our joint accounts, which were, unsurprisingly, nearly empty. When the police went to the storage unit, they found furniture from our guest room, my grandmother's silver, and boxes of expensive electronics. All things he'd told me he'd sold online because we never used them. He was a parasite, and I had been his host for far too long. Mark tried to contact me, of course. First came the desperate voicemails, pleading for me to understand, to talk to him, telling me he could fix it. Then came the angry texts, accusing me of ruining his life, of being vindictive and cruel. He didn't seem to grasp that he had already burned his own life to the ground. I was just refusing to go down with him. I never responded. I blocked his number and directed his lawyer to speak only to mine. He had become a stranger, a villain in a story I was determined to finish. The divorce was surprisingly fast. Faced with felony fraud charges, Mark's lawyer advised him to agree to all of my terms in exchange for me asking the DA for leniency. I got the house, what was left of our savings, and his entire retirement fund to offset the debt he'd racked up in my name. He got to keep his car and his freedom, though with a criminal record and a court-ordered restitution plan that would follow him for years. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a clean break. It was enough. The day the divorce was finalized, I came home to the quiet house. His muddy boots were no longer by the door. His crossword puzzles were gone from the table. The silence wasn't heavy or suffocating anymore. It was light. It was potential. I walked out to the crooked porch swing, the one we'd bought at a flea market on our first anniversary, and sat down. For the first time in months, I cried. Not for the man I had lost, because that man had never really existed. I cried for the 16 years I had given to a ghost. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in unbreakable rhythms and the safety of a hand on her back. After the tears, I felt calm. The story was over. The drama had ended. As I sat there watching the sun set, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old friend asking if I wanted to go hiking that weekend. Hiking. The thing Mark always said was boring. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "I'd love that," I typed back. I was 41 years old. My life was a mess of financial wreckage and emotional debris. But as I sat on that porch swing, alone but not lonely, I felt an unfamiliar sensation stirring in my chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close. It was the feeling of a blank page. The story of Mark and I was finished, but my story, the story of the real me, was just beginning.